So I'm going to present you this study, which is about sexting with adolescents in romantic relationships, and that's the title of the study. So we know that sorry we know that the worldwide prevalence of sexting is about 15%, almost 15%, and the researchers also claim that sexting can be seen as a way to flirt, build commitment, and express sexual interest. So they begin with a definition, which is this one: sending of self-made sexually explicit photograph via the internet or the mobile phone. And they use this quite narrow definition, which only focuses on photograph instead of focusing on also on texting, for instance, because they believe that it will be easier to study this way. So the research question that the researchers came up with is: how is sexting related to relationship satisfaction? And in order to answer this question, they used the triangular theory of love by Sternberg, which contains three dimensions, which are intimacy, passion, and commitment. As you can see the definition here, for intimacy, it's the feelings of closeness, connectedness, and boundedness. For passion, it's the experience to be physically close to, physically attracted to, and sexually involved with your partner. For commitment, it's the commitment to love the romantic partner and to stay in the romantic relationship for a short and longer period of time. So they came up with these two hypotheses, which are that sexting in adolescence will be correlated with the three dimensions of love, which are the three that we just saw. And sexting in adolescence will be correlated with verbal conflict, and more precisely, perceived verbal conflict. So for the method, they recruited 657 adolescents aged between 40 to 18 years old, 14 to 18 years old. The majority of them were girls, and they were all in relationships. All of them were Dutch-speaking people living in Belgium. In order to measure the engagement in sexting, they had to dichotomize the variable because they realized that a lot of the adolescents uh, never had engaged in sexting, so they had to use a more polarizing question by asking them if they had already engaged in sexting or if they had never engaged in sexting. So for the triangular love scale, they used the triangular love scale for adolescents. It was the Dutch version. As you can see, the three dimension of the theory. They have 7, 4, and 4 items respectively, and here you can see the statements that the participants had to rate themselves on. It was like a scale. I'm just going to read you the first one, which is: I can tell everything to my romantic partner, which is for intimacy, and it's the same for passion and commitment. So to assess perceived verbal conflict, they used the 5-item scale measuring verbal aggression acts. For the relationship length, they asked a single item question, which was: have you been in a relationship for more than 6 months or less than 1 week? For the prior sexual behavior, they asked once again one single item question, which was: have you ever had sexual intercourse or not? For the data analysis, they used this software, which is the SPSS, which is a data analysis software. They also used logistic regressions to assess relationship between independent variables and dependent variables, which are relationship variables having sent a sexually explicit photograph. Finally, they controlled for age, gender, length of the relationship, and prior sexual intercourse, um, as I just mentioned here. So the results were that there was a significant correlation between perception of passion and sexting. There was also a significant correlation between perception of verbal aggression and sexting. And there was a significant correlation between prior sexual experience, and sexting. And there was a marginal correlation between relationship length and sexting. And also, I didn't write it here, but there was no significant correlation between intimacy and commitment and sexting, which was the outcome viable. So for the discussion, we're going to focus on passion. Um, the first time. And we can say that adolescents who perceive their relationship as more passionate can be motivated to use sexting. And what is interesting is that sexting can be an important part of their sexuality, and it's maybe not something that should be disregarded because it can help them in some way because it is correlated with the passion dimension. But as I mentioned before in the result, there was no correlation between intimacy, commitment, and sexting behavior, which was quite surprising because the researchers expected uh, to to obtain at least some level of correlation between intimacy, commitment, and sexting, but it was not the case. So what this means is that maybe adolescents engage in sexting only for the patient dimension, as we just saw here. So this could mean that they engage in sexting, in, in sexting, sorry, um, only for sexual need, only in order to fulfill their sexual need, and it has no relationship, no link between with intimacy and commitment. Finally, what we can say about this topic, this study, is that there is a higher perception of verbal conflict related to sexting. It was the result of the second uh, hypothesis. So indeed, the perceived verbal conflict is related to sexting. This can bring risk of revenge with secondary sexting, for instance, but it's not the only risk. Um, and girls also are more exposed to psychological pressure to send text. For instance, sometimes guys can simply ask them to send text, and girls will do it more easily, text or photograph, for instance. Girls will do it because they feel pressured, or they can also do it themselves without even being asked because they just feel like they need to do it. So what this means is that we should use, interpret, and understand sexting and texting with caution because it contains some risks. This was the research question: is sexting related to relationship satisfaction? And the answer is we don't really know yet, because as we saw earlier, it is correlated with passion, but it is not correlated with intimacy and commitment. So it is quite hard to decide what is relationship satisfaction, and if, according to our results, sexting indeed satisfy the relationship itself. So that's something that should be dig upon further. And finally, it is also important to do some prevention. I mentioned it here, but in general, explaining to adolescents what is sexting, how we can help them, because it can indeed help them for passion, as we saw here, because it correlates with it and it can help feel them more passionate in their relationship. But also, what are the drawbacks and the limits of such use of texting, because as we saw, it is correlated with perceived verbal conflict, but also There are some risks for girls, for instance, and we should warn them that it is not necessarily correlated with intimacy and commitment. And of course, we should do this in more easily understandable terms. But overall, it is something that adolescents should be careful about. So thank you for having listening. This is my reference. This is the reference of the study, and thank you again.